What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Tuesday, September 26, 2017, coming on down to the end of the month here, getting into October. Got to start getting all those Halloween goodies ready to go for the little kiddies here. And we have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And Mike is in our control room, taking care of business, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. So let's get right on into it. Do you remember this whole brouhaha over Facebook supposedly accepting ads from a Russian-linked group that were supposedly purchased through shell websites and IDs, and tried to make a really big deal about it? And originally Facebook said, no, the ads don't exist. And then there was a high-level meeting between Zuckerberg and some power players in Washington, D.C., and all of a sudden Zuckerberg found the ads. Oh, yes, horrible, horrible, proof that Russia was trying to interfere with our elections. And what's really interesting here is those ads have now leaked out. And they supported Hillary Clinton. So it's another big nothing burger, this time with cheese all over it and egg all over the faces of everybody who's trying to make a big deal out of this. And again, a lot of people are saying, why are you working so hard trying to prove that Russia is interfering with our internal politics when Israel's doing it right out in the open all the time? And it's okay for Israel to come on in and have AIPAC and bribe our members of Congress and support and destroy certain candidates on behalf of a foreign power. But if Russia is even suspected of it, oh, it's a horrible, horrible thing. And again, there is no proof it actually happened. And you can hardly avoid the hypocrisy that's on display, because the U.S. interferes in foreign elections all the time, all over the world, including rigging the elections to get their favored candidates into power here. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Jim in Chicago, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, I am really outraged with this president. Here, Puerto Rico is underwater. People are basically starving and not having a lot of things to live day by day, and he blames them for the problem that they have.
Well, it's true that Puerto Rico's infrastructure was weak to begin with, but yeah, they got hit by these two storms in a row. And I think what it is they're looking at least 10 years of reconstruction and a whole huge amount of money. I'm sure the Clinton Foundation is already out there raising money for those poor people on Puerto Rico. But with our budget is stretched and focused totally on war. And as is usually the case, I don't think the U.S. government can really do all that much about it. Now, they do have some military forces down there that are assisting with evacuations and getting into the interior of Puerto Rico. They're just now reaching the interior. I mean, that's how slow it's been going, trying to get through all the damage here. But I think the agenda is to keep the focus on the wars, North Korea and Iran, and Puerto Rico is just a distraction, so they're just trying to make it go away.
You know, the thing that really surprised me was regarding the Jones Act, which means only American ships and workers can go in there, because I was listening to Democracy Now! This morning, and they stated that other islands want to help Puerto Rico, but due to the Jones Act, they cannot do it.
Well, it seems like maybe this would be a good time for a presidential executive order suspending the Jones Act for the duration of the emergency. But Puerto Rico is not the only island that has been absolutely reduced to rubble. The focus is on there because it's a U.S. possession. But Barbuda was just scraped off. Dominica, they've all been pretty much trashed, and they need a lot of help down there.
Well, I would agree, but like you stated, Puerto Rico, you know, there's American citizens, and we own that property.
Well, because they are a U.S. possession, yeah, the U.S. government does have certain obligations to them, but I think the U.S. government just doesn't have the money because they're gearing up for World War III.
Yeah, I would agree with you as far as the money. Where in the hell is the money going to come from? And that's regarding not only Puerto Rico, but Florida, Texas, and other places. So, well, I'm going to let you go. You take care and God bless.
All right, thanks an awful lot. I expect that probably there's going to be money that's available for Florida and Texas because they are states in the United States and they're critical to the economies of the region. They need to get all those oil refineries and pipelines back on board. They need to make sure that the Mississippi is still open. There's an economic component there where the money put in to repair Texas and Florida will, in the long run, generate a profit, or at least a healthy economy in the region. I think a lot of the thinking is no matter how much money they pour into Puerto Rico, they're never going to get it back. Puerto Rico's industry is some agriculture and tourism, and the rent they collect on the land that big radio telescope sits on here. Now, apparently, as former White House Chief of Staff and current Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel said, you never let a serious crisis go to waste. And apparently, while everybody was looking at these hurricanes smashing into the United States and into the Caribbean, President Trump signed away the Fourth Amendment buried in a new bill. And he basically set a precedent by empowering the police state to allow warrantless searches in parts of Virginia, Maryland, and D.C. near the metro train systems. Now, there is a small problem there. There is a Supreme Court ruling called Marbury versus Madison that ruled that any law repugnant to the Constitution is automatically null and void. And so there needs to be a constitutional challenge on this bill brought before the Supreme Court, and as soon as possible. And we know this government has no allegiance to the Constitution. They all take an oath. I hereby promise to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States from all enemies, both foreign and domestic. I think that oath of office used to include and bear true faith and allegiance to same. And that somehow got lost in the intervening decades. That was the oath that you would comply with the limitations and restrictions in that Constitution. Our government just doesn't do that anymore. We're going to do a shout out now to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. Now, Roger Stone finally had his day before the Congressional Committee, testified in secret, but he was certainly not closed-mouthed when he came on out there, basically saying to the congressional investigators what he's been saying to everybody else. There is not one shred of evidence to back up the allegation that he was somehow involved in collusive activity between the Trump campaign and the Russian state. He's demanding an apology. He even called the ranking member a liar. He's not pulling any punches there. Now, we've been talking about the problem that Donald Trump has by coming into the White House and wanting to be magnanimous in victory and keeping on a lot of people from previous administrations. And apparently, Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke said yesterday nearly one-third of the employees in the Department of the Interior are not loyal to him or President Donald Trump. And he's working to try and change the department's culture to be more business-friendly. But again, once you have a job in government, there are so many protections, it's almost impossible to fire an incompetent government worker. So Zinke is a former Navy SEAL, and when he took over the Department of the Interior, it's 70,000 employees, and he said he got 30% of the crew that is not loyal to Trump or himself or even the flag. Now, getting on to the war zones, Human Rights Watch, in an interview in Russia Today, is saying that the United States coalition in Syria is seriously underreporting the civilian casualty figures in Syria. And as you know, they came on out finding that the U.S.-led coalition killed at least 84 civilians, including 30 children, when it carried out 2 airstrikes near Raqqa last March. Now, the official U.S. government position is there were no civilians present at the time of the attacks, that all those children were actually ISIS in training, which is ridiculous. But they're not being careful. They're basically, as the caller said yesterday to the show, they call it collateral damage and just hope we'll all get used to the idea that for every one terror jihadi suspect that they hit with a cruise missile or a drone strike, there may be 20 to 30 innocent civilians around that get killed, and we're just supposed to think that that's all hunky-dory. No, it isn't. It's actually a war crime. And even more alarming is the fact that they very often do not actually have proof that the intended target has done anything wrong to the United States of America. I remember a really tragic story that happened a couple of years ago where they were profiling people on the ground when they were looking through those cameras on the drones, and they just decided that anybody that was exceptionally tall would inevitably become part of the jihadi groups. And so they would launch a strike against exceptionally tall people. So one day they see this crowd of people going across the street, and there's one really tall figure in the middle. They launch a strike on it, and what they hit was a teacher taking his school children class across the street and just blew them all to bloody bits. Now, a video has surfaced showing that ISIS fighters operating in Deir ez-Zor are cooperating with the U.S.-backed Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces. In fact, ISIS has been told not to attack those people. They're working together. Remember back when the U.S. government was telling us ISIS are the bad guys, ISIS are the enemies. No, ISIS is working for the U.S. Now, apparently, Russia used one of their long-range bombers to fire cruise missiles at Daesh positions in Syria. The planes took off from Engels Air Base, located 14 kilometers east of Russia's major port city of Saratov. They flew over the territory of Iran and Iraq and launched KH-101 air-to-surface cruise missiles at designated targets. They apparently destroyed a number of terrorist command posts, fortifications, military hardware, and ammunition depot. Now, apparently, Syria's Air Force fighter jets, they have MiG-29s, and Russia is now supplying them with the latest version of Russian air-to-air missiles that allow them to track and engage the most modern airplanes used by Syria's enemy. These are serious cutting-edge weapons, and of course, Israel is going to scream for more money because of this. Oh, Syria's got the latest missiles. We need something better. You American taxpayers, you pay for it. Now, while there is still fighting going on all over Syria, it really is coming down to just 3 remaining provinces that are going to decide the outcome of the war. And at this point, it's becoming a foregone conclusion. Absent an unprovoked decapitation strike by the United States against Damascus, Syria is going to remain in the hands of the Syrian people and the Syrian government. The 3 provinces that are still where the decisive battles are being fought are Deir ez-Zor, Idlib, and Raqqa. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Bill in Missouri, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, my friend. I've been wanting to tell you a couple things here, but this government underreporting. I've been watching this Vietnam series with Ken Burns and that, and how they used to get a body count up. They would kill civilians to make it more dramatic, so they can keep the rich pumping stuff into them. And Mike, it's just like with Equifax to get off the little side here. You notice how they didn't tell him by anything for 3 or 4 months, and then when they did it, they waited for us to have all these hurricanes and everything. Oh yeah, that's when they come out, so it get wiped off the front page, which it has. And I mean, this is horrendous what they've done. And this government, this administration, is not. It was in the paper. Of course, we know what it is, even if it isn't in the paper. They do not want any more laws put on these businesses, to guide away from that. And they're just taking everything out. So all they're in business for is big business. That's business, big business. And I just am so tired of it that I just don't know where we're going with Donald Trump. I was glad he got Hillary Clinton out, but it looks like he's unifying the country all right, like he said he's going to. Everybody's going to be against him. And Mike, I've talked to you, and I'll let you go on this. The morals of this country are so gone and everything, and clear back in the Vietnam War and fast forward to Afghanistan right now. We can't, for some reason or other, even put these nations away, and we have no resistance with our air power and bombs and everything when we go in, and we still can't do it. If anybody ever shows up, that's why we don't fight Russia or China. They've got our number, and boy, they've done things with our planes and that. Did barrel rolls, wing tip to wing tip right on top of them, and we said that's a violation. That's dangerous, because the Chinese and the Ruskies can really fight. So I just wish we had a better country to live in. I thought Donald Trump was going to do it, somewhat. I knew there'd be some graft in that going, but I'm disheartened by it. I think it's going to be the same old thing from here on out. I don't think we're a better nation for it.
I'm afraid you're right, and I'm very disappointed in Donald Trump. I'm certainly glad Hillary didn't get into that Oval Office. But Donald Trump is a reminder that the lesser of two evils is still evil, and it's a stupid way to be running a country. And however it came about, Donald Trump has been co-opted by the war party. He's surrounded himself with all these generals in a country that is supposed to be under civilian leadership. And the war agenda is definitely moving forward. And speaking of Vietnam, and I'm obviously old enough to remember that, we never found, the body counts. They would kill a bunch of North Vietnamese, and then they'd count them and bury them, and then they'd come back and dig them up and count them a second time. And they were inflating those statistics. But as far as our own killed in action and wounded, we never found out the total number until the war was already over. Because they were underreporting those numbers. They didn't want Americans to get any more intense about opposing the war in Vietnam. And ultimately the American people did, despite the best efforts of the FBI to keep us divided against each other, blacks against white, and so forth and so on, through COINTELPRO. But eventually the American people realized it was really more important to end that war in Vietnam than to go around being constantly mistrustful of each other. And so that's basically how that happened. As far as the U.S. not being able to get out of the wars it's in right now, in some cases it is simply because the U.S. simply doesn't have the resources to fight and win a guerrilla-style war across an entire country, which is another lesson coming out of Vietnam. In the case of places like Afghanistan, they're garrisoning the country because the whole reason for going into Afghanistan was an oil and gas pipeline right-of-way and the opium, and now, of course, the rare earth minerals.
Yes, and Mike, I appreciate your show. I really do. You have a way to turn a phrase that accurately describes what's going on, and you and Lady Claire's presence of mind is really astounding, and keep up the good work. Thank you.
I will, just as long as we possibly can here. And we're going to switch over to Sherry in Texas. Aloha, Sherry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Mike. I heard Ron Paul speak on an earlier show this morning, and he was absolutely fabulous. And the reason I was really taken by one thing in particular he said, but first he was saying all the things you talk about, that other countries need to protect themselves from our aggression and our past attacks based on false premises. He went into that a lot, that we endanger them, and he was talking counter to the host too and saying, no, I don't think you understand, And in particular, I like that he understands the importance of letting others solve their own problems. Like, if we go into these countries and we're not welcome, we should bring those guys home. He even said that bring them home. We need them here. We need them in Puerto Rico,
yes,
doing things and clearing things. And let them work with Russia and China if that's what they prefer, any country with whom they have good relations. And, this is funny because this is a big thing that Gandhi talked about. When people when people own their country, they own the problems and the conflicts, because he said everyone has race problems, everyone has religious problems where you have to learn to get along. But it's the freedom-loving citizens. It's up to them to do something about their problems.
Absolutely,
themselves.
Absolutely right. Sherry, stay on the line. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Sherry in Texas. And again, it's just common sense. Every country has a right to defend themselves against aggression. And the U.S. aggression is always masked behind claims that we're bringing these people democracy, even though the U.S. government always imposes a dictator, or that we're dealing with the problems in this other person's country, and of course, following the invasion, the problems never get dealt with anyway. It's just another excuse, like Saddam's nuclear weapons here. And the U.S. basically has gotten itself into this horrendous economic mess, and they're relying on history, specifically World War I and World War II, to sell this idea that getting into a new world war, even if it means the U.S. starts it, is somehow going to make the economy bloom, or at least give the government a villain to blame all the hardships on. And yes, you're hungry and you're homeless and you lost your job, but don't blame us, the government. Don't blame Wall Street. It's those gosh darn Russians and those gosh darn Chinese and those gosh darn North Koreans, because that did work the last two times. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008. Here we are on the brink of big mistake number 3, and this one's probably going to go nuclear more toward the beginning than toward the end, according to Paul Craig Roberts. He says that they're already talking about preemptive strikes on countries using nuclear weapons, and that's got everybody really, really nervous. But I want to share a little insight. Everybody looks back at the 1950s as this golden era. The American dream was very real. America was prosperous, and there are a couple of overlapping factors. First of all, the United States was the only country who had not had their industrial base bombed into rubble. And so there was a period about 6-7 years where everybody in the world who needed to retool had to come and buy machinery from the United States of America. Business was really good. Then you had, of course, the Bretton Woods Agreement was already in effect then. And the financial system of our country was grabbing a mafia-like piece of the action of all global commerce. And then finally, an artifact of the war itself, you had all these people who returned from the war zones, and they had gone through military training in the war zone, and they were good, hard workers. They had discipline. And I saw this show the other day about, they were talking about the housing boom of the 1950s, where 30 guys would put up a 2-bedroom house in a single day, because it was organized around military Corps of Engineers methods, and they were just putting that stuff up there. And today we have people that don't have that discipline. I especially look at the snowflakes and the liberals. And the idea of us getting into any kind of a conventional war with any other country with these people in the uniforms, that's a very scary thought. And we already understand that the military are lowering their requirements for recruits just to get people in those uniforms. And that may be a factor in these recent ship collisions, where they're just taking anybody who's willing to sign on the dotted line, putting them in a uniform and say, here, have a destroyer to play around with. And
right.
But that earlier caller was right. A big part of it is Americans have lost their moral compass. We're so obsessed with making money and making the big score that we've completely lost sight of the fact that we have certain obligations to our fellow citizens and to our nation as a whole, which is that if we're going to sell a product, we make it safe and effective. If we're going to build something, we make sure it's not going to fall down. We've lost that love, that pride in workmanship for the sake of doing a good job. And a lot of this is driven by the consumerism and mass advertising, where American self-image is no longer based on who they are or what they do, but what clothes they're wearing and what scent they've sprayed on their face that morning.
And when we own a country, when it's truly ours and we're free to do that, we don't want the responsibility for our well-being in someone else's pocket. We want our happiness to be up to us, you know, and Ron Paul was saying that war is not the answer. Of course it's not the answer. We need to back off and focus on, but we see we're not free. We're not free in that respect.
No, we are.
We've got all this opposition.
You understand the core selling point of the Democratic Party is vote for us and we'll take money away from these people over here and give it to you, whether you call it reparations or welfare or whatever. Sherry, got to let you go. Got to take another commercial break.
You.
We'll be back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And apparently the Senate has just abandoned their latest attempt to replace Obamacare. It's turning into a do-nothing Congress because of all the partisan bickering that's going on. Unless, of course, the issue is Israel, and then the votes are always nearly unanimous to send Israel more of your money. All right, we're going to go back to the phones here. Paul in Montana, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mr. Rivero, concerning Puerto Rico.
Yes.
We hear President Trump saying that the people of Puerto Rico have got to pay back their odious debt to the Zionist banks. But yet, we don't hear President Trump saying anything about the fascist families, such as the Colones and the Riveros, who have totally bankrupted Puerto Rico to fill their own pockets. Why are we not hearing about the fascist families that have totally run Puerto Rico into the ground? They are fondly referred to as the Blanquitos, but then I guess it's politically incorrect for me to say this. Would like your comments on the air. Thank you.
Well, Puerto Rico is hardly unique. All those Caribbean islands have been subject to exploitation by various countries, especially the United States, due to the proximity. We know that the CIA was through there wanting to keep these countries broke and in debt in order to keep them under control. And at this point, for Donald Trump to get up there and say Puerto Rico has to repay this debt that they owe, may I ask, what with? They just lost everything, and they're going to be rebuilding for 10 years. And at some point, somebody needs to get out the pen and simply write that debt off, because they're never going to get it. And you're right, much of that debt is odious, and I think Puerto Rico is going through the same thing that Hawaii did when Hawaii was a possession, because Hawaii was being exploited and kept poor and permanently in debt. Until the issue of statehood came on up. And again, even that statehood vote was a little bit rigged, because supposedly to change the status of a non-self-governing territory, the plebiscite, the vote, has to have three options: remain a possession of the host country, become a full state in the case of the United States, or become independent. And that option for independence was never on the ballot here in Hawaii, or for that matter up in Alaska. So yeah, it's all about grabbing more land and more wealth. And yes, we know that the bankers of the world basically see the entire human race and the planet as theirs for the plundering. But at some point, you got to get some common sense in there. You're not going to get the money from Puerto Rico. They just lost everything. And you would like to think at some point there's going to be some humanity and even mercy, and say, okay, let's get them back on their feet, let's restart, and let them move forward. Because in the long run, you're probably going to make more money by rebuilding Puerto Rico and letting them start out with zero debt than continuing to struggle under a crushing debt that prevents them from ever improving their country, improving their industry, improving their tourism. We're seeing exactly the same thing over in Greece. The bankers are taking so much money out of there that Greece doesn't have the resources to try and build any new sources of revenue generation. And it's incredibly short-sighted for the bankers to be thinking like that. They're thinking like bankers. Let's be honest about that. All righty, so we're going to move on here. Russia is now rejecting any revisions of the Iran nuclear deal, saying it will aggravate the situation in the region, as will Trump unilaterally pulling out of the deal. And again, it puts Trump in a very awkward position, because if he just cancels the P5+1 deal, it's sending a message to the rest of the world, especially North Korea and Iran, that you cannot trust the U.S. government promises. And we have Donald Trump is out there trying to convince North Korea that if they surrender their nuclear weapons, that they'll be left alone. And they're trying to convince Iran that if they surrender their long-range missiles, they'll be left alone. But we know from Libya and Syria and Iraq, that's just not the pattern. So right now, we know that polls here in the United States are showing the American people their distrust of the U.S. government is at an all-time record low. And I would suggest that probably that's true for the entire world. Nobody trusts the U.S. government any longer. Now, China, as you know, established its first overseas military base in Africa, and they just staged their first ever live fire military drill on that base. And it's near the strategic Straits of Hormuz in Djibouti. And that's making the United States very nervous about maintaining control over that Gulf transit point. Now, China would like to get into Africa. That's why they've got the base there. But the U.S. is trying to basically grab all of Africa for itself. That's why we have this AFRICOM that's down there. Remember when Germany demanded its gold back from the New York Federal Reserve and the Bank of France, and all of a sudden the French invaded Mali, which was Africa's third largest gold producer. That's what's driving these things. It's all about money and wealth. Ultimately, all wars are economic. Grabbing money, resources, land that do not belong to you by force. And the public is fed an endless series of lies about, oh, they're coming to attack us unless we attack them first. We're bringing them democracy. We're solving their problems. We're rescuing them from a cruel dictator. And on and on and on and on. Now, over in Kurdistan, they finally released the official results of the referendum. The yes got 91.83%. No got 8.17%. So, yes won in an absolute landslide. Iraq is throwing a tantrum right now. And they're demanding that Kurdistan's regional government hand over control of all of the airports in the Kurdish region to avoid an embargo. Iraq is trying to move in and impose direct control over key economic and infrastructure assets. Now remember, this referendum is not actually binding. It's a symbolic gesture only, but everybody's reacting to it very, very strongly. The U.S. wants Kurdistan. Israel wants Kurdistan because this is part of their plan to basically redraw the map of the Middle East and break these big countries up into smaller countries that are easier to push around. So we're seeing these reactions all over the world where a lot of people do not want this to go forward. Obviously, for Iraq and Turkey, this means surrendering part of their region to the new eventual Kurdistan. And apparently earlier today, Turkish President Erdogan warned the Kurdistan regional government that pushing for independence risks sparking an ethnic war in the region. And Turkey already has their forces down on the border, and they've already been conducting military exercises with the Iraqis. So this could turn into a war. But again, this referendum does not compel the Kurdish regional government to do anything at this time. It was merely an expression of the people. But everybody's reacting to it like they've already seceded. And again, under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they do have that right to do that. Now, Chief of Staff of Iran's Armed Forces, Major General Mohammad Hossein Bagheri, blasted the referendum for independence in Kurdistan as a plot hatched by Israel and its allies, chief among them the United States of America, again as part of this plan to take the large nations in the Middle East and break them into little tiny pieces, to balkanize the whole area, so that the countries can be more easily exploited, bullied, pushed around. Now, Turkish Minister of European Union Affairs, Ömer Çelik, said that the inclusion of Kirkuk in the referendum could result in a bloodbath. So everybody's all hot and bothered about that. The Kirkuk governor, on the other hand, has declared an overnight curfew after the Kurdish independence vote, concerned about violence in the streets. But with a 91% margin, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Erdogan is threatening the Iraqi Kurds with famine, basically going to close the border, and he's had an interesting quote out there. He said, Israeli flags won't save you. Remember we were talking about how all of these rallies for the independence referendum, there are all these Israeli flags that are being waved around. And Israel has already committed to sending 200,000 Israelis of Kurdish descent into the region. And so Erdogan is saying that the Kurds will not be able to find food if Ankara decides to halt the flow of trucks and oil into the region by closing the border, saying that all military and economic sanctions are on the table. So this is a very, very tense situation over there. All right, let's take a couple of phone calls. James in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Hope you're having a good one. Yeah, you're right, Mike. It looks like the Kurds are going to be used as the cannon fodder for Israel now that ISIS is gone. But I wanted to get on this thought about the economy, and why do you think we, instead of just closing down our factories and kicking off, letting go of the workers, why do you think we didn't try to just export management to all these other nations that have tremendous amounts of population? Like, use the factory workers and train them on how to be managers of assembly lines without robots, just people, and ship them along with not just factories, but like, I don't know how am I going to put this, but like, you know, basically ship our brains to other countries with the American factories, but basically kind of like a give and take, you know what I mean? Like, we're not really losing anything because we're creating managers instead of just letting go of all those workers that know about the factory life, you know, they know about the factory jobs. Why not boost them to a higher level and make them be their own boss? And you got all these other countries with tremendous populations that would have done well from American manufacturing management in a way. If it's already happened, kind, like you said, from the 50s.
It's already happened. I mean, America started turning its back on manufacturing something like 30 years ago, where they got into the idea of the so-called service economy and the idea that, well, we're just going to invent a new product and we'll have it manufactured overseas where it's going to be much less expensive to have it done. And the U.S. government went along with this. They came up with the service economy to try and cover that loss of manufacturing jobs. But these other countries started making offers to American manufacturing experts to lure them away, and many of them have gone. We don't have the management talent left in this country that really understands manufacturing, which is one of the reasons why those few products we still make in this country, such as the F-35, aren't really doing very well. Because the people who really knew how to set up and run a factory properly were already gone. Now, my father was very much into this. He was a graduate of MIT, and he was one of those people. Were he still alive, he probably would have been lured away because he showed me what it takes to set up a factory so it's going to run efficiently, and it's not an easy task to do. And the people who know how to do that have been lured away for the most part. There are very few left in this country. And what really makes this sick is that during the Bush administration, they actually wrote the tax code to incentivize American corporations to offshore jobs. And part of that was tied in with globalism. This idea that we're going to have all the electronics manufacturing over here and all the automobile manufacturing over here and all the agriculture over here to make the planet dependent on the rest of the planet to sort of lock in the globalist system. And the other part of it, of course, is that the American standard of living has to be lowered to match that of the rest of the world before they drop those borders. And they haven't accomplished that yet. That's why when the borders came down, everybody's flooding into Europe and the United States.
No, I'm saying instead of letting go of the factory workers, our factory workers, why not subsidize their schooling for man? Like, instead of getting rid of them and throwing them out on the streets, saying, hey, here's schooling opportunity, and we're going to pay for it until you get your management position so then we could use you in our factories overseas. But then they just kick all our workers to the curb, and then they hire a bunch of new workers with a bunch of basically Chinese managers. You know what I mean? Like,
well, you know, when somebody comes in and buys a factory, it's like the movie Gung Ho with Tom Hanks. When you have somebody comes in from a foreign government and buys the factory, they bring their management team with them. And by the way, it works the other way. When American companies set up a factory in a foreign country, they'll send their managers down there. When Ford opens up these automobile factories in Mexico, they will look for managers in their own structure to go on down there and get it set on up. The problem is you can't have a country that's full of managers and no workers. We're already management heavy in our entire government and corporate structure right now. Japan has a much more realistic way. Their rule is management should never exceed 10% of the workforce. And that's what made them initially so efficient, although Japan's in serious economic problems right now for the same reason that China is. Their main export market was the United States, and as the American economy has tanked and the American people no longer have money, we're not able to buy their products anymore.
The manager's focus is on too much of advertising and making money instead of focused on making a good product. I think that's where the problem is
that's part of the problem.
Their direction of thinking.
That's part of the problem, and that came out of the Harvard Business School at the end of World War II when they didn't have enough managers for all the exploding business that was taking place, and so they created the idea of scientific business management, a common interface, and then a degree program for managers to learn that common interface called the MBA, the Masters in Business Administration. But it created a generation of management with no respect for the products their particular company was manufacturing. And that delinking, I think, was the beginning of the decline of American product quality. James, we have to let you go and take a break for commercials. We'll be right back with another phone call. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take another phone call from Dustin in New Jersey. Dustin, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Hey, Mike, I wanted to talk what your previous caller was kind of talking about, but first, hey, Mike, you know, if you look at those photos of the Russian in Deir ez-Zor, well, that outskirts after Euphrates River where the so-called United States weapons is sitting in those ISIS positions. Did you see how nice and clean those ISIS positions are? Like, they're perfectly bulldozed, almost reminiscent of the British Empire when they stood up those columns back in Africa. Remember where they had the grids shaped?
Yes.
Where they put, like, their soldiers. Yeah, it's too perfect for any ragtag ISIS, you know, ragtag-looking guy to do. They're too perfect when you look at them. So it's definitely professional, done by a state actor, which is Israel, United States, and Saudi Arabia at this point, or Britain.
Yes.
And so after that, I want to continue. The previous caller was talking about, I hate to say this to him, 85% of the manufacturing is in China. And I know Jim Rogers said, like, because we're so arrogant, ignorant nowadays, not all of us, but a lot of us, Jim Rogers said, Americans, when they go to look for a job, they go, how many weeks vacation we get first. In China, they ask how many hours a week can I come to work. You know, Chinese people get paid less, but they have more money in their savings account. Americans don't save, and also they're being ripped off by 0% interest rates. So it all comes back to Americans and their own government being, you know, ruining it for both each other. You know, we let our government get away with, you know.
You know, our government propagandists like to talk about how much money we're making in this country as opposed to how much money people are making in other countries, and, oh, they're doing so much worse off than we are. What they don't really talk to you about is the fact that the cost of living is lower in those other countries. The cost of buying certain things is lower. The cost of food is lower, and the taxes are lower. So just pointing to the number that's on that paycheck of yours is not really an indicator of whether you have a better quality of life than the people in the other countries. We have a lot of people advertising on our website that talk about come and retire in places like Costa Rica, which doesn't even have a standing army, and your retirement savings are going to go a lot further there. And so it's a bit dishonest to just talk about that number on the paycheck as being the only indicator of how well your life is going, especially as we see more and more indications of runaway inflation taking hold.
Yeah, you also see, do people realize all the permits and regulations that hamper, just the American people in general? Not to say there shouldn't be, EPA for clean water and stuff, but, if they live in the same town and drink your same water, which, hopefully they should. If they don't, then they should have some kind of regulation. But the permits and the regulations crush everybody.
Yeah, they really do. Dustin, stay on the line. I want to take you into hour number 2 because I got a reply for you. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Dustin from New Jersey, and it's kind of hard to really look at what's going on in this country. Everyone wants to find a simplistic explanation, but what we have are a lot of overlapping factors, government, banking, and so forth. And you hit on one of the important ones, the regulatory burden. And the regulatory burden comes from 2 different places. First of all, it's people in government that are literally trying to create jobs for their friends and family, nepotism. And so they'll say, we need to have somebody who's keeping an eye on blah, 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 blah. The other part of it is it's a way of trying to get the unemployment under control. It's failed miserably, but that's where a lot of this came from. And that's why when you go to the hardware store and you buy a ladder, it's covered with stickers on the correct way to use a ladder and do not do this and do not do that, because obviously somebody is out there with the stickers on a roll and they're being paid to just stick them on there. And it's not that anybody who's using a ladder really needs that information, because we all know the correct way to use a ladder. It's simply another way of mandating the creation of a job. And so you'll have the government that will come on into the business and say, for safety reasons, you must have these people that you add to your payroll who are going to stick stickers on the products. And some of them can get pretty obvious and pretty silly. But we've become a nation where you've got like 20 people to make and sell a hammer. One person to make the head, one person to make the handle, one person to stick them together, and everybody else is in safety inspection this, or usability testing, or the rest of it. And it's one of the reasons why American manufacturing has become as inefficient as it is all the little add-on stickering people and regulatory compliance. And one of the reasons given for American businesses to go to other countries is to ease the regulatory burden. Now, I agree with you that in some cases there do need to be regulatory oversight. I'd like to see more oversight on the vaccine industry, for example. As far as the EPA is concerned, they haven't been very good at protecting the environment, and they were never supposed to be. Richard Nixon created the Environmental Protection Agency as a dodge to cover the government starting to seize public lands in order to pledge as collateral on government borrowing. So they were never really about the environment. So it really is an issue. Some regulation is needed and required, but it almost seems like the things that are being regulated don't need the regulation, and the things that do need the regulation aren't being regulated at all. And again, going back to what I was saying yesterday about all these companies that harvest and mine our data online, and they have all kinds of information that can be used to cause us harm, and they're handling it very recklessly, and it's being leaked out and placed on unsecured servers, and there ought to be somebody regulating that as well. Another example, of course, would be the Securities Exchange Commission, which is supposed to regulate Wall Street. But when Harry Markopoulos came on in there and said that Bernie Madoff is running a Ponzi scheme, They weren't interested. The SEC investigators who went over to Madoff's place, they handed him resumes. They wanted in on the party.
That's because Wall Street runs a Ponzi scheme.
Well, the whole idea,
hey, Mike.
the whole private central banking is basically a Ponzi scheme. It only exists as long as they can find larger pools of new borrowers to support the old borrowing that's gone on before it. And when you run out of new borrowers, the whole thing is going to collapse. And we're there right now. Everybody is maxed out on their credit. You know, it's amazing when you consider my particular economic circumstance. I'm getting ads all the time. You're pre-approved for a credit card for 18 zigableams of dollars. And, you know, it's ridiculous. It goes into the shredder. I don't want a loan. I want a high-paying job. And I think that's probably true for most Americans.
But if you look at between your state, Hawaii, and New Jersey, we got the highest taxes in the country, right? Like state taxes? Huh?
Well, ours are pretty high, and it isn't the income tax, it's the excise tax that really takes a bite, because the excise is applied at every single transition along the path from importer to store. When it comes off the ship, the excise tax is applied. When it goes to the wholesaler's warehouse, the excise is applied again. When it goes to the supermarket, it's applied again, and then when we check out, it's applied again. So even though the excise rate is nominally low, the cumulative effect is something like 15-20%.
It's a shame because, you know, with all this welfare in all the states and there's nobody, you know, they're not producing anything. Eventually, you know, like you said, we're coming to a point where it's just, it's unfixable because there's just not enough income coming in to pay for all the, you know, for all the debt. And, I think we're just really in a bad position in the world, and just coming soon, Mike. I mean, it's just like, it's just unsustainable.
Of course, you can't sustain it. There's no way to sustain an economy based on private central banking, because by design it creates more debt than money with which to pay the debt. And the bankers like to lure everybody in to using credit for whatever they're doing. Credit lines to get the inventory into your store, and everybody's doing everything on credit, and the banks are just siphoning off wealth from all of that. We need to go back to a cash and carry economy. But, of course, the bankers will never allow that to happen. Now they're talking about wanting to ban cash entirely so that we'll be forced to be dependent on the bankers, and they'll just charge whatever fees they want to.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates just now rejoining the network. And, of course, this is hour number 2 of our program. Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind?
Well, Mike, I think Dustin was right between the bankers and our completely suborned Congress and federal government, and endless wars, and are beholden to a foreign government. We're pretty screwed. But I wanted to get into another aspect of that, and that's freedom of the press. And I know you know who Philip Giraldi is.
Oh, yes,
right?
Yes.
Yeah, do you know the story about him? What happened, Mike? It just happened the last day or two.
No, I'm not up on that.
I sent that to you. He writes. He's former CIA career CIA officer. He was at one point among other assignments. He was the station chief in Turkey, and he also was a DIA officer, high ranking. Also did work in counterterrorism. He's a head of basically an organization for Palestine and against basically Israeli encroachment into our political process. And he has been writing for the American Conservative, which was begun, by the way, about 10, 15 years ago when Pat Buchanan wrote an article called "Whose War?" about the 2003 war,
mm-hmm.
and it was, of course, referring to Israel pushing the the Iraq War.
Yes,
and that's when it was founded. And now he was fired for writing an article that said America's Jews are driving the United States wars.
I saw the article, and they made a big deal over the fact that people were linking to it, and it was called anti-Semitic. And again, there's absolutely no question. Israel tried to keep a low profile, but Israel very clearly was cheering on the war with Iraq. Israel provided a lot of the faked documents that claim to be evidence of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, and they're doing exactly the same thing with Iran.
That whole thing with the Office of Special Plans with Douglas Feist and,
yes.
And Paul Wolfowitz and Richard Pearl and David Wormser. He names names, and there's millions of names. As a matter of fact, you and I could probably add more names to this. But nothing, it's indisputably true. And yet he was fired. So he's fired. He'd be a great guest, Mike.
Well, I'll try and get him on there. But when it comes to Israel, the fact that you're speaking the truth is not a protection. I mean, they just threw that grandmother in prison for questioning the Holocaust, and they've got their knickers in a twist because apparently this Jewish American came on out at a conference in Great Britain and said freedom of speech means that we can question the Holocaust. And everybody said, oh, you anti-Semite, you self-hating Jew, and all the rest of that. And it's obvious from the way that Israel reacts whenever anybody questions the Holocaust. They act like they've got something to hide.
Well, Mike, I sent this article to my sister, and she came back and says, yeah, blame it on the Jews, this kind of thing she always says. And I said, it's indisputable. And she came back and says, you're over the line, you're over the line. I repeat one more time, you're over the line. I said, wow, I said to my sister, you're over, it sounds like a threat. When SB 720 passes, you can then duly inform on me, and I can go to jail. And it's, but that's what the people are in denial that that's how much influence they have.
Well, that influence is also in the influence is also in school and media. I would have asked your sister, who drew the line that you seem, absolutely unwilling to step across, and who's on the other side of that line?
Yeah, but the very fact that, you can inform on me, and by the way, despite the First Amendment, I'll go to jail because of these people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So just wait a little longer, and you can inform on me. It's just ridiculous. That's where we're at. That's how much power they have.
Yeah, it's pretty scary.
Phil Giraldi is a good man, and his political analysis is really penetrating, in my opinion, especially on the Middle East. He'd be a great guest, Mike. You guys
I'll try and get him on. I'll try and get him on the show.
All right, thanks. That's it for me, man. Thank you.
All right, thanks. We're going to take another phone call, then we're going to try and get back to the news here. I got a lot of stuff to get through today. Bill in Pennsylvania, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How you doing, buddy?
Doing okay.
Hey, man, I wanted to make a comment about the Trump and NFL thing. I watch your show every day, and I agree with just about everything you say. But and I'm not trying to be confrontive to you or anything, but, there are some things about Trump that really are good because, sometimes I think some people don't, recall, the fact that he's only been in office for 7 months. And just look at some of the good things he's tried to do recently, like the travel ban. He's trying to protect us from terrorists coming in here. And I think, if more people, or at least some people, would look at the opposite side of the fence, what would have happened if he wouldn't have won? Yeah, he's got a lot of things that aren't good, like he's following what the military-industrial complex is telling him to do, and maybe he's trying to play the art of the deal with them because no rockets have been fired, so maybe he's trying to play with them, and I know it's a dangerous game. But as far as the NFL thing, I really don't think it's a thing that he stooped low. I really think that he's Americana, and there's a part of him, just like myself and a lot of people that voted him in, are tired of people disrespecting this country. And, like you said yourself yesterday, it's actually against the law, and I didn't know that until you said it. There's some Article 33 or something where it's actually against the law to do that, and they're just tired of the liberal entitlements and these guys make on the average $5 million apiece. A lot of them make a lot more than that. And they're going to sit there and disrespect the country and everything. I just think it's terrible. So some of the things Trump does, I really think is from his heart. And just like a lot of us, he's just sick of putting up with the ignorance and the liberalism of, you know, the socialist whatever. I just don't care about this country. I hate this country. And, you know, I think that's a big reason why he said that, you know, because, you know what I mean? And some of the things he does are good. And, you know, if you really look at the point, what would the country be like right now? He's just 7 months into his presidency, just 7 months. Well, where would we be right now if Clinton would have won?
Well, you're not going to get an argument from me on that one. We would have been much further along the road to the dark regions. And again, I'm happy that Trump and the rest of us kept Hillary Clinton out of the Oval Office. But there are some areas in which I'm disappointed. We still have Obamacare. He still has not built that immigration wall. He's unfortunately unable to clean his own house and get his team in line, and that, I think, is his biggest failing. Because, again, I said this before, he came into the job as president as dangerously naive about the reality of D.C. politics as Jimmy Carter did. He came into the White House expecting that it was just another business, that he was going to run in a business-like way, and that's not the way Washington, D.C. works. Anyway, Bill, going to let you go. Need to get back to the talking points and get some news done here. Apparently, in Syria, Russian engineers built a temporary bridge over the Euphrates at Deir ez-Zor to help the Syrian army in that race for eastern Syria against the U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces. They're all going after those oil fields. And these Russians, just to show how tough they are, they did so while under attack by ISIS shelling and mini drones. And they still got that bridge put up. So, for them. Now, apparently Iran faked that last ballistic missile test. They showed the missile in a parade, and then they claimed that they launched it, claimed it could hold 8 warheads, which is a nod to a potential nuclear deployment vehicle, because you don't put conventional warheads on a missile that carries 8 warheads. They'd be too small to be effective here. Well, it turns out the video that Iran released was actually of a launch that took place in January, and so everybody's wondering what's going on. Now, I think Iran was very reckless to try and fake this, but I think Iran is taking a lesson from North Korea that you can, in fact, bluff the United States government and get them to back down. I think it was a dumb thing for Iran to have tried. Better to just show the missile in the parade, and that would have been the end of it, rather than get caught faking a rocket test, which makes you appear weaker than you were trying to portray yourself as. So that was a goof. That was a whoopsie there. Now, an envoy from the United Nations, Nikolai Mladenov, is basically saying that Israel is ignoring the United Nations demand to halt the construction of illegal settlements. But then, when has Israel ever listened to the United Nations? Israel holds the world's record for the most United Nations resolutions passed against it. And basically the attitude is Israel does not obey international law or any other law because they're God's chosen people. They answer to a higher authority. Now, Trump has slapped more U.S. sanctions on Venezuela, and he added Venezuela to the travel ban list. And like North Korea, it's more symbolic than real. There aren't that many people that come from North Korea to the United States. Same for Venezuela, probably a few more. But it's more posturing. And Venezuela is saying that Trump is acting like he's emperor of the world. And yeah, it does seem like that. And Donald Trump may still think that the United States really is the most powerful nation on earth. In terms of nuclear weapons, yeah, that's true. But in terms of conventional warfare, look how badly we've been doing in all these countries. where we can't seem to put finish to any of these things. We're still in Iraq. We're sending more people into Afghanistan. We're losing in Syria. We've made a mess of Libya. We're making a bigger mess of Yemen. We can't be the world's most powerful nation anymore. We don't have the money. We don't have the manufacturing. We don't have the manpower. And we don't have the moral authority. Prudence would say we've got to take care of our country first, get our infrastructure back up, get everything running smoothly in this country. We are ill-prepared to really go into a world war, and we're going to lose this one. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now over near North Korea, the U.S. and their allies, South Korea and Japan, are continuing to just run these military exercises close to North Korea. And Russia is expressing their opinion that this is deliberate taunting and provocation against North Korea. And of course, they're absolutely right. There's no reason they couldn't run these drills off the coast of South Korea or off the coast of Japan or anywhere over there in the Western Pacific. They're deliberately trying to goad North Korea into doing something that would justify a U.S. military strike. And despite the corporate media's portrayal of Kim Jong-un as a crazy man, I don't think he's going to take the bait. I don't think he's going to take the bait. Meanwhile, the U.S. has thrown yet more sanctions onto North Korea, 8 North Korean banks and 26 individuals. And these individuals are bank workers living abroad. So in one sense, the U.S. has declared war on North Korea, an economic war. And economic wars are usually the harbinger of real bloody war. China is warning that war will have no winner because of the potential that this is going to go nuclear. Because if the U.S. attacks North Korea, once that happens, there's no reason for Kim Jong-un not to use anything that's in his arsenal. Russia is warning of catastrophic consequences if conflict erupts on the Korea Peninsula. Now, Ron Paul came on out with an article the other day saying the solution is really easy. Pull all of the U.S. military forces back, tone down the threatening rhetoric, and get the two Koreas talking to each other about reunification again. But reunification is not what the U.S. government wants. The U.S. government wants tension and turmoil and chaos because there are business opportunities in there, especially for weapons sales. Speaking of weapons, we're starting to see analysis come on out about just what North Korea actually does have. And we've talked about their massive amounts of conventional artillery. It's drilled into hardened tunnels in the mountains all along their side of the DMZ. The North Korean Air Force is estimated to have over 1,300 aircraft. Now, most of those are legacy Soviet models, and their primary responsibility is defending North Korean airspace. They do have some modern aircraft. They have 35 MiG-29 Fulcrums, 56 MiG-23 Floggers, 34 Sukhoi Su-25 Frogfoot close air support aircraft. So if there is a fight, it's going to be intense. North Korea is not going to be a pushover like Libya or some other place like that. Now, oddly enough, and this is coming out of Zero Hedge, apparently representatives of North Korea have been approaching Republicans in Washington, D.C., and this is reported in the Washington Post, and they're trying to figure out what's going on with Donald Trump, why he's behaving the way that he is. And they're going to Republicans who were part of the Never Trump movement to find out what's going on and how do we get Donald Trump to back off. Meanwhile, Russia has test-fired another of their Topol ICBMs with a new advanced warhead. It was launched from Kapustin Yar range and hit its target in Kazakhstan. Now, nobody's calling that a provocation. It's just a test. But if North Korea does it, oh, it's a provocation, it's horrible. The U.S. is not going to want to, they're not going to attack Russia. Russia's got nukes, it's got missiles. Now, we've been talking about the poor quality of weapons produced by the United States military-industrial complex, and it goes from one embarrassment to the other, and apparently it's not just the weapons, it's the crews as well, as illustrated by the USS Fitzgerald and the USS John S. McCain, forgetting the rules of the road, so to speak, and getting into these collisions for which so many people have been sacked. We have been talking for a long time about the huge list of problems with the F-35. There's been a new development, and I will share that with you after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking about the F-35, which is a boondoggle by anybody's definition in military boondoggles. And to recap, can't fly in the fog, can't fly in the rain, can't fly near lightning. The original version of the naval variant couldn't land on a carrier because the arrestor hook was too close to the main landing gear, and the landing gear was slapping the cable down before the hook could engage it. They fixed that one. Software for the onboard cannon is still a year away. They're making up for it with a belly-mounted cannon, which adds weight and cost and bulk to an already overloaded aircraft, which can't even successfully dogfight against 70s vintage aircraft. And it's got a bad habit of the insulation in the fuel tanks breaking off and causing the engines to explode spontaneously. Little tiny annoyances like that. Apparently the helmet fire control system still isn't synchronizing all the information from the various sensors. Now, they're hoping to fix all of this with a software upgrade. The Block 3F. Now, all of the F-35s, 1,763 is the ultimate aim. Right now, all the planes are running the Block 2B platform, which is not considered combat ready, and they're waiting for the Block 3F. Now, for a lot of these airplanes, this configuration change is going to be very expensive because it isn't just doing a software update. They have to physically change components on the aircraft to work with the new software. And so the Pentagon is considering retiring 108 F-35s before they ever fly, taking them off combat status, and they're just going to use them for testing or training purposes. Now, getting into the economic news here a little bit, as you know, when the hurricanes Harvey and Irma hit Texas and Florida, everybody's saying, well, we're sorry for all the suffering and hardship and loss over there, but let's look on the bright side. All these people are going to have to buy brand new cars, and this is going to ease all the manufacturing surplus for the car companies. Well, it's not really happening. First of all, they overestimated how many cars were lost, and apparently many of them can be put back into service. And because these people don't have a lot of surplus cash right now, they're rebuilding from the hurricane damage, they're choosing to get their flooded cars deflooded, refurbished, or they're going to buy used cars, newer cars but not brand new. And so Harvey and Irma are not going to end Carmageddon, and we are hearing word from all of the major auto manufacturers who've got these huge lots filled with completed cars that they can't find buyers for. They're already starting to shut shifts down and pull back on the manufacturing. And it's amazing to see. I mean, if anybody had any money, now's the time to buy a car. I mean, they are wheeling and dealing. They're trying to get the 2017s off the lot because the 2018s are about to hit the showroom floor. And they really can't do it. We have one local dealer here apparently lost their lease on their storage yard. And so they're really selling the cars just because they have to get them out of there by the end of the month, which is just a few days away here. So it is a real mess. But apparently they seriously overestimated how many cars were actually lost or irretrievably lost. Now, apparently over in London, London's Mayor Sadiq Khan basically tried to compare Donald Trump to ISIS, saying he's using ISIS-style rhetoric And I can see that Sadiq does have a little bit of a point if you look back at Donald Trump's UN speech regarding North Korea and Iran, but Nigel Farage leapt to Trump's defense and basically told the London mayor what for. Because in the realms of diplomacy, there is a certain decorum that is expected. And it does seem to be going away. Have you noticed that the rancor between politicians is now out on public display? And normally they don't like that to happen because it makes the voters and taxpayers very, very, very nervous. Now, everybody is still looking over last Sunday's German parliament elections. And even though Angela Merkel succeeded in winning one more term as chancellor, it was a major debacle because the three major German parties, the Christian Democratic Union, the Christian Social Union, and the Social Democratic Party, all took heavy losses. So Angela Merkel still has her job, but a lot of the people in her party lost theirs. And this election was the worst in history for the Social Democratic Party. And, of course, it has brought the Alternative for Deutschland party into the Bundestag. Last number I heard was they got 97 seats. And Merkel is going to have a tough time forming a new coalition government. She doesn't have a solid majority with her party or even the second party that's always going along with her. So it's going to be very, very difficult. But even though Merkel is still chancellor, it's obvious she was disappointed by this result. Now, the AfD showed up at the Bundestag today, and they were met with hundreds of Antifa activists protesting, shouting, "Go away, Nazi pigs," and say it loud, say it clear, refugees are welcome here. That being the issue that propelled Alternative for Germany to their election victory. I mean, it's a huge success. The party only formed 4 years ago, and now they've got 97 seats in the Bundestag. So along with everybody else, I can imagine George Soros is very upset at the results of the German election because it signals there is a pushback. People want to hold on to their cultures, their nation. But Merkel is still loyal to the globalists. She's still defending her open border migrant policy, saying she's going to continue it. And you people just better get gosh darn used to it. Now, that's a tall order because according to police statistics, the latest police statistics, almost half of all crimes committed in Berlin are committed by the refugees. And that's an issue. And it may be happening here in the United States because the FBI is now reporting that violent crime is on the increase in the United States. Now, prior to 2015, violent crime had been in decline. And all of a sudden in 2015, it started shooting up again. Murders are up 8% this last year. And that coincides with the flood of migrants into the U.S. And again, as I mentioned, latest police statistics in Berlin, half of their crime problem is committed by the refugees. It's starting to happen here. Now, the AfD win should be a wake-up call for Merkel and the European Union. This is coming from William Hague. And basically saying you have to deal with this reality that this open borders for refugees project has triggered a huge nationalist pushback. And they're going to have to deal with it, or you're going to see these nationalist, anti-refugee, anti-open borders parties, they're going to continue to make gains. And as a matter of fact, over in Russia today, they're now predicting that even though Angela Merkel did win another term as Chancellor of Germany, it's probably going to be her last. Because as the refugees continue to come on in, they continue to commit rapes, robberies, murders, and so forth, it's only going to fuel the resentment by the German voters. And I think the next parliamentary election, it's going to be a rout for those traditional parties who supported open borders. Now, do you remember this guy, Abraham Ukbagabir? And he was arrested, tried, charged, sentenced to prison for murdering a woman and her son in an Aiea store in Sweden. And he was from Eritrea. He wanted to seek asylum. They refused, apparently went on a rampage. He's in jail now. And just to give you an idea of how these refugees think, or what they've been told life is going to be like in Europe, he's now asking that he be let out of prison temporarily. He wants to visit a McDonald's and do some shopping. And apparently he thinks they're going to actually do that. It's amazing. Now, over in Spain, their suppression of the Catalan independence movement continues to escalate. And they could easily trigger a civil war. And again, the issues are Catalan wants to be independent. They're tired of basically carrying the majority of Spain's economic load. And, of course, Madrid doesn't want to let Catalan go because that is the piggy bank. And so Madrid has arrested the leaders of the independence movement. They've been charged with various crimes. They sent the police to confiscate the ballot boxes and the ballots. But everybody in Catalan is saying the vote is going to happen. It's going to happen here first part of October. Catalan farmers staged a protest. They drove 1,000 tractors through the town center to protest the crackdown by Madrid on Catalan democracy. We're going to take a phone call here now. David in San Francisco, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Michael. Yeah, it's interesting hearing about this new party over there. I got to hear more about it. But I was going to remind you, you've paid attention to Project Censored, right?
Yes.
Yeah, they've had a series for years, probably 30 years, the most censored stories of the year. Well, last year's was, and it would be the 2016 issue. The number 5 issue of the 10 censored stories was that refugees now can be declared. The World Bank has created enterprise zones. And if you're a refugee and you end up in one of those enterprise zones, you're going to end up in a sweatshop. And if you have a job in a sweatshop enterprise zone, then all of a sudden you lose your legal status as a refugee. So it's basically a way of rounding up anybody that has to go on the run, whether it's from, Hurricane Harvey or something like that, or ISIS in Syria. And one of the examples that they give in the most recent Project Censored is the Syrian refugees have been forced into these work camps down in Jordan. So it goes into detail about these corporations that are now setting up sweatshops over there, and the normal making tennis shoes, or whether it's making clothing or auto parts or whatever. And these are not high dollar jobs. They're sweatshop work jobs, work 12 hours a day. And so the World Bank is loving the idea of refugees. So, as I hear you discussing this, people going on the run as a refugee have really got it tough. If they're running from ISIS, they got one angle. If they may end up running from the World Bank on the other hand.
Well, the problem is that the vast majority of the people coming to Europe and the United States do not qualify as refugees. They're basically using the open borders to try and get into some place that has a better economy where they'll be better off than they were in their home country. And more in Europe, they're discovering that as they process the paperwork on all these asylum seekers, that the vast majority are not, in fact, fleeing Syrian war zones or ISIS. They just fell for the propaganda that was being showered all over their home country saying, come to Europe, we've got free stuff for you, and lured them on. Right now, with the war in Syria winding down, a lot of those Syrian migrants in Europe are actually starting to return home now. And I would think that maybe some of those people in those sweatshops down in Jordan might actually do the same, just clock out one night and never come back.
Well, Syria, you're right. Syria is almost over. I've been paying attention to Syria in perspective, and yeah, the last battles are winding down. But as far as the World Bank's refugee policy and sweatshops, that's going to continue. And as you may know, just about the time Hurricane Irma was hitting Florida, they had another typhoon that hit Bangladesh,
yes,
and killed 12,000 people right away. And if I remember right, there were millions and millions of people in India and Bangladesh that were flooded out. They've become refugees. And, you know, knowing that Bangladesh is already filled with sweatshops, now the World Bank is going to be able to create a new double down policy on sweatshops. It's a horrible, to be a refugee, you know, they create sex slaves, prostitution, children get abandoned from their parents and end up slaves of organized crime and whatnot. It's a horrible position to be a refugee, but to lose your legal status, you know, if you end up a sex slave, if you're a 14-year-old girl that, you know, your mother gets lost in the waves, and you end up in looking for refugee status, and they decide to turn you down, you're going to be ending up as a prostitute all the rest of your life, rather than being, you know, maybe an educated child. So it's keep a track of this Project Censored number 5 for the year 2016. This is ongoing, and it's
and there's something that we need to mention here. The reason there are so many refugees in the world right now is because of all these ongoing U.S. wars of aggression. Right now we're dealing with the largest refugee problem since the end of World War II. And it's all coming out of these countries the U.S. government is making war on.
Oh, I don't doubt that. But the global warming and these massive typhoons, you know, technically, you know, people in Houston could end up refugees, and if the World Bank, you know, has any hand in it, trying to get back to your home in Houston is going to be tough. Because never underestimate the ability of the World Bank to stick their nose into too much of what we hold
no
dear.
Question about that, but I somehow don't think they'll be setting up any kind of an economic zone in either Texas or Florida. That would be definitely over the line.
They've already done it. They've done that here in San Francisco. They found ways to create in the Mission District. They created economic zones where they can basically give the big corporations tax breaks, and the mom and pops get driven out.
We got to let you go here. Got to do a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And I alluded to this a little earlier in the show. But apparently over in Great Britain, the Labour Party is now being accused of anti-Semitism because they had a speaker at a party conference, an Israeli-American author, Miko Peled, who said basically freedom of speech has to be an absolute, and that includes talking about the Holocaust. There should be no limits on the discussion. And, of course, immediately it's, oh, you're an anti-Semite, you're a self-hating Jew, you're over the line, how could you do this? But he's absolutely right. If you put a limit on freedom of speech, then it's not freedom of speech, it's permitted speech. And we already have that in this country. You're not permitted to criticize the government of Israel, because then you're just a Jew hater, which is kind of like saying you're not allowed to criticize the Nazis because you just hate the German people. It's really a rather absurd situation. But again, if you look at the intensity with which Israel protects that orthodox telling of the history of World War II, they act like they've got something to hide. I mean, if somebody comes on out and says they saw a Bigfoot, people will chuckle indulgently. They don't lose their job. Somebody claims that they were taken for a ride in a flying saucer. They don't have their career destroyed. Only in this one area, if you dare question, you will lose your job, your career, and you will go to jail just like that grandmother over in Belgium. Why? Why this one story? And that's because the entire justification for the nation of Israel rests on this idea. And if it were revealed to be a hoax, and in this post-Saddam and his nuclear weapons world, we cannot dismiss the idea that we've been lied to about other things. A lot of people would be very, very unhappy, including every single American who's been sending money to Israel to atone for the Holocaust, even though we had nothing to do with it. In fact, as I recall my history, we sacrificed a lot of blood and treasure to stop the Nazis from completing whatever it was they were trying to complete. You would think Israel would show us gratitude. Israel would send us money. Israel doesn't even act like they're grateful for what we did in World War II. Maybe because they know it's all a fiction. Like the claim that there never was a Palestine. And then we go back and we find it's on all the maps in the Middle Ages. They had coins, they had all kinds of stuff. There was a Palestine. We know now that we live in a world of lies. Lies by governments, lies by corporations, lies by the corporate media. And we have to work to find our way through to the truth. And given the fact that we were lied to so blatantly about Saddam's nuclear weapons, prudence demands that we re-examine everything we have ever been taught in the state-controlled schools or the corporate media. And we have a right to do so and to discuss it. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. So let's talk about this NFL nonsense. It is really getting out of control. In fact, it's come about so quickly, it does almost feel orchestrated, where they're going to use the sports stars to convince us America is terrible. Because remember, for the globalist dream to happen, at some point, the United States has to be brought down and destroyed. And maybe that's what's going on here, maybe not. But I do think it's reached a degree of silliness. And again, I think Donald Trump shouldn't have stooped so low as to get involved in this. He's got more important things to deal with. Now, surveys continue to show that Americans agree with Trump, that these protests are inappropriate. This protesting the anthem by going down on your knee is inappropriate. I think what's going on here is we had that Gallup poll we talked about yesterday. 71% of Americans think the nation is being governed poorly. But that doesn't mean they don't love their country and their fellow Americans. I think Americans want to feel good about the United States. I think Americans want to feel good about being American. That was a big part of Trump's campaign, Make America Great Again, for which he was denounced as a racist. So I think Americans are responding to Trump on this one because most of us have lived our entire lives here in the United States of America, and we may have visited other countries, found them fascinating, but we are, in our heart of hearts, Americans. And that's a very difficult thing to let go of when it's been your entire life, especially when you remember a much better time in this country, which people of my age do. So I think that's what's fueling the hostility against the NFL. Americans want to believe in the United States. They want to believe in America, the American people. They don't like the government, but they don't have a problem with the country. Now, NFL ratings are dramatically down. Apparently, even Rush Limbaugh refused to watch NFL over the weekend. And this is causing a real problem for the NFL owners, some of whom were out there posing with their players down on one knee. They're all on board with this thing. Well, not all of them, because apparently there's word circulating one of the NFL owners wants to quit, sell the team to somebody else. And the reason is very obvious. As you know, these gentlemen who are complaining about how terrible life is in the United States of America while pulling down these $5, $10, $20, and $40 million salaries, those salaries are guaranteed by contract. And the only way those salaries get paid is ticket sales and TV residuals, TV licensing fees. And if those go away, then the owners of these teams are in a serious, serious financial bind. And I'm not surprised that we're hearing talk of quitting, because it's big business, big money, And if you've got a winning team, you can get very rich very quickly. And if all of a sudden people start burning the tickets and burning the jackets and staying away, it can go really bad really quickly. Now, apparently, Sheila Jackson Lee decided to kneel on the House floor Monday to show her solidarity with these spoiled, overpaid NFL players who have disrespected our country by sitting out the national anthem at games. That's what these players are doing, and I think that's why the American people are so angry with it. They're disrespecting our country, meaning they're disrespecting us, the other Americans. Meanwhile, Maxine Waters is out there saying that Trump's comments about the NFL are an impeachable offense, and she's calling Trump the most deplorable person she has ever seen. She ought to stop using that, because remember how that backfired on Hillary Clinton? When she said everybody supporting Trump was deplorable. We all said, yeah, we are. Proud of it, too. Now, there is one NFL player who did show the proper respect. Over at the Steelers, I'm sorry, I should say the Kneelers, Alejandro Villanueva stood up for the anthem. Now, Villanueva is a former Army Ranger, and he stood up for the national anthem on Sunday in the game against the Chicago Bears, and he's told reporters he didn't intend to make his fellow team members look bad. He just wasn't aware that they weren't standing with him. And what's really amazing is seeing all the hate and hostility directed at him for standing up for the national anthem, which, by the way, is required under NFL rules. Meanwhile, the corporate media is trying to push this idea that the national anthem is now a relic of white supremacy. First, it was the Confederacy. We're going to tear down the statues and the monuments. We're going to break it all because it's a symbol of racism. Oh, now it's the national anthem itself is a relic of white supremacy, along, of course, with Donald Trump. Because, after all, he's a white male, and we were supposed to have a woman as president this time out here. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. So let's look at what's going on in places like Chicago. Strict gun control, very high murder rate, 508 people dead so far this year. They would still be dead if we'd scrapped the national anthem. If you want to protest something, protest the real problem. And that's a big part of what I think is going on with this NFL kneeling situation. They're trying to basically distract us from the real problems, the economy, the wars, the out-of-control violence, the deterioration in every city that's under control of the Democrats, by saying, oh, it's the NFL players and the flag is a relic of white supremacy. Next, they're going to start attacking the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence, because after all, they were written by white guys. We shouldn't be letting white guys decide how our country is going to work. That'll be next. Now, interestingly enough, prior to the year 2009, the NFL teams stayed in the locker room while the anthem was played. And then after the anthem was over, they'd rush out onto the field and they would do what they're being paid to do and what people are buying the tickets to see them do. It turns out that starting in 2009, these NFL teams, and not just the NFL teams, sports teams in general, were being financially incentivized to play up the patriotic displays. And this was propaganda that was paid for by the U.S. Department of Defense and the National Guard, meaning you actually paid for it. You were paying these multi-million-dollar earning sports stars to go on out and do the red, white, and blue, rah-rah, join the military, along with those military flybys, the airplanes that go over. Heaven only knows how much they cost. Now, right now, the corporate media is trying to claim that this never happened. It did stop in 2016. But between 2009 and 2016, it did happen. And as a matter of fact, there was a government oversight report released in 2015 by Senator John McCain and Jeff Flake that detailed how the Department of Defense paid professional sports teams and leagues for patriotic displays honoring America's soldiers. Now, in the National Defense Authorization Act for 2016, this practice was prohibited, And they suggested that the leagues and teams donate the money they'd received to organizations that support the military veterans and their families, which we don't know whether it actually happened or not. But when you see all these people out there with the flags and all the rest of it, it was bought and paid for. Now, there's a lot of people who are asking if this overt display of patriotism is about reviving our sense of nationalism, or if it's trying to get young people all hot and bothered to go down to the recruiting center and sign on up. I tend to think it's the latter. But inadvertently, they're sparking the former. Meanwhile, there's an article that came over from QZ.com. Maybe it's time to stop playing the national anthem before sporting events, because that's certainly not what people are there to do. The tradition of singing the national anthem before sporting events was an attempt to link the nation's status to these displays of athletic prowess, kind of like in the Colosseum in Rome, where the gladiators would say, "We who are about to die salute you," to the emperor. And by the way, if you read the exact U.S. code on the proper display of the flag, very often these sports teams are in violation of it. You're not supposed to hold the flag flat on the ground. We've all seen these displays of a gigantic flag just flat on the ground. It's never supposed to be displayed that way. It's got to be on a mast, flying free. It can't be used as an article of clothing other than a shoulder patch. So it really is a lot of nonsense out there. But again, I think the reason why Americans are siding with Donald Trump on this one is, especially for us older Americans who remember what this country used to be when it was the greatest nation on earth. We want to be there again. We want to be proud of the United States of America. 71% of us don't agree with what the federal government is doing, but we don't have that problem with the rest of the country. We don't have that problem with our fellow Americans. We want to be proud of our nation. We want it to be great again. There's nothing wrong with that, except for the globalists who are going to come on in and scream that you're a racist for wanting your country to be your country, for wanting to hang on to your culture. No, you don't want your culture. We're going to take away the Confederacy. It's racist. Now we're going to take away the national anthem. It's a relic of white supremacy. Just trying to erase who we are so we're easy to control. That will be a cold day in the dark regions, I can tell you right now. Well, over at Equifax, their chief executive has stepped down in response to the massive data breach, especially the revelation that one happened last March and was kept from the public. This guy was making $4 million in salary. So I'm sure he has his little golden parachute. But it was a huge mess. And again, if you go to Equifax's website to find out if your data has been compromised, one of the conditions that you have to agree to is not being part of a potential class action lawsuit, which I understand they're already cranking up on it. And there's 143 million Americans are going to sign on to it. And as I was telling that caller yesterday, it's not the amount of money that's involved. It's sending a message. If the government will not take responsibility for protecting the privacy of our data collected by these companies, then we, the people, have to send a message. First of all, we don't like being spied on. We don't like all this data being collected on us. But if you're going to collect it on us, you take care of it. And every time we talk about another data breach or something going on, half the time it's because somebody wasn't applying the patches, or they just recklessly put the data where it could be seen by the entire world. Sometimes that's a good thing. If you remember Bev Harris, how she got the software for the GEMS election system and was able to examine it to find out how it was rigged to steal elections, it's because it was put on a publicly accessible FTP site. And then, of course, Diebold tried to take her to court saying she'd stolen the software from them, and the court said, no, you left it out there carelessly. It's like if you drop your wallet on the sidewalk and somebody picks it up, you can't say they stole it. All right, so let's talk about iOS 11. And apparently the issues I'm having with it are turning out to be relatively minor. Some people are getting some reports that the phones just get stuck on apps. They have to use a hard reset to clear the issue. The apps that this affects are Reddit, Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, Messenger, and Safari are all affected. Fortunately, I don't use any of those on my iPhone. And apparently there is a huge drain on the battery, which Wandera, a London-based mobile security company, found iPhones using iOS 11 took 96 minutes to empty their battery, whereas those on iOS 10 took 240 minutes, more than twice as long. Now, Liana Laporta, head of content marketing at Wandera, conducted a study of 50,000 iPhones and found that the battery drain may come down to the iPhone Spotlight app. Now, Spotlight is this generalized searching tool that will search your iPhone and search the internet for something of interest. But I don't know that that's the villain. What is the villain, and I did mention this yesterday, there are a lot of the apps on the iPhone that fetch data even when the app is not running. And that uses a huge amount of battery power. And you can go into settings and turn off fetch so that your mailbox doesn't load up with emails you've already read on your desktop. And so far, the battery life seems to be fine with all of the fetches turned off here. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Errol in the Netherlands, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello?
You're on the air.
Okay. I just wrote something down, and I hope you people will like this. It's our 5 sentences. Here I go. The people of the world does not want military option. The people of the world want a dialogue in many countries. The unipolar world has become a multipolar world. The multipolar world will be there for future generations. A multipolar world will be better for all of us.
I would tend to agree with that. In fact, I think planet Earth would be a lot better off if it was, instead of one single global government, if we had like 1,000 small little countries, each minding their own business and taking care of themselves. Because anytime you get a country that gets too big, they start getting these imperial ambitions. And the result is massive death. The United States briefly did enjoy a unipolar world, but they're losing it. In fact, they lost it primarily through their own incompetence and bad management. I know they're going to blame Russia and China for it. But they spent themselves into bankruptcy. And they just allowed this liberalism to demoralize an entire generation. And again, I'm absolutely convinced that somewhere down the road, the United States federal government is going to have a Soviet Union-style collapse. And I think that's the best possible outcome for the entire world.
And exactly what you are saying, it will be a short tragedy, I will say this, but I don't think, and I think also I want to say this to your audience, don't be afraid that your so-called mainstream media says, oh, now we have a nuclear war or everything. No. We are now passing a line. When we had, and you said it also, Mike Rivero, you also said it. When we had internet in the 1900s, when the first World War broke out, when we had this technology today, there would be no World War.
I don't think that's exactly what I said, because it seems like we're heading to a world war right now. What we don't have is a population that is convinced of the necessity of the world war.
Interesting. But I think it won't happen because I think it's all scaremongering. The most part of it is scaremongering, and we need to always keep vigilant. You call it vigilante. So we need to keep everybody needs to know who he is, where he is dealing with, who is his neighbor, what is my neighbor. You know what I mean?
Yes.
A lot.
Yes, I do.
Yes. Thank you for taking my call, and that was it.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And as you know, Apple had a rather dismal rollout of the new iPhone 8 and the new iWatch, which has already been revealed as having some really bad problems, where reviewers are saying they can't recommend this. And it seems like we're seeing a deterioration in quality. I mean, Apple at one point was considered a flagship technology company. And then all of a sudden it starts going downhill. I remember when Hewlett-Packard, when Messrs. Hewlett and Packard still ran the place, they put out the very best of whatever it was you needed. And then Carla Fiorini took over as CEO and value engineered everything, and it was an absolute disaster. Now, people just don't have money for a new phone. They're keeping their phones until they don't have any other choice, just like Claire and I did here. But we're already getting indications Apple may be scaling back the iPhone X production. Apparently, suppliers are being told to ship only 40% of the components it originally ordered for the manufacturing of the iPhone X. So that may portend for the future. And again, $1,000 for a cell phone, that is really ridiculous. Now, there's another company out there called Fairphone, and they've been selling smartphones since 2015, and they've got a unique difference. Their phones are made of components that can be swapped out by the owners, even without technical skills. They've made a phone with simple-to-replace parts. And the idea is that the smartphone would last a much longer time, because if the screen breaks, you just buy a new screen. You don't have to buy a whole new device. And I think that's a very good way for them to go. And I think it's probably going to catch on, because a lot of people are very concerned with these monolithically built devices that you can't get in and fix. Say, I'm old school. You know, I'm used to having computers where if something goes wrong, you open it up, you yank a card, put a new card in, you're back up and running. With the smartphones and the tablets built the way they are, if any one component fails, you just throw it away and you buy a new one. They're not built to be repaired by the end user. They're not even that easy to repair by the professional shops like Geek Squad. It's planned obsolescence. You will buy a new device every so many years, and Fairphone is going the other way, where you just buy and replace the component that needs to be replaced. I think that's a really, really good idea. There has been yet another data breach. This is over at Deloitte, which is one of the big four accounting firms, and they had a breach of their internal email systems. This was reported in The Guardian, and Deloitte is trying to downplay the incident, saying it impacted very few of their clients, meaning it impacted quite a few. According to a source close to the investigation, the breach dates back to at least the fall of last year and involved the compromise of all administrator accounts at the company, as well as Deloitte's entire internal email system. Now, they've discovered a new Android malware, and this is exploiting the Dirty Cow Linux flaw to gain root privileges. And it's using the copy on write mechanism in Android's Linux kernel, and it installs a backdoor, which can then be used by attackers to collect data and generate profit by routing your phone calls through a premium rate phone number. Now, Trend Micro detected this malware in more than 1,200 malicious Android apps, which disguise themselves as pornography and gaming apps alongside host websites containing malware rootkits that exploit Dirty Cow. It's really turning into a jungle out there. And I have to wonder, is there some reason why the government is allowing this to get out of control? And I'm going to have to put a little bit of thought into that as well. Are they trying to force us in a particular direction for the safety of our security and privacy? We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're still talking about computers, backdoors, viruses, and posing the question, why is this being allowed to spin out of control? Well, certainly there's the broken window analogy. We're all being forced to spend huge amounts of money that we don't have on all kinds of security software for our computers, knowing that the CIA and NSA has already backdoored all the security software, and the cyber criminals know where those backdoors are because both the CIA and NSA have had their cyber toolkits leaked onto the dark web. It's a huge, huge mess. Now, over the last few years, I have been seeing a clear trend start to evolve of trying to take the world back to the model of computing as it was in the 1970s, 1980s, where the idea of a computer in your home was a rarity. If you had anything in your home, it was a terminal. When I worked at Robert Abel & Associates, I had an old VT52 and an acoustically coupled 300 baud modem in my home where I could log in and check my renders. And I thought that was pretty cool, being able to log into those computers from my home, and through those computers I could get to Usenet and FTP and various other things as well. Then, of course, the personal computer revolution changed everything, and everybody had a computer in their house. But it seems like we're being forced back to that world where all the computing and all the data are on mainframes or the cloud, and all of our personal electronic devices are merely terminals into that remote mainframe. And I have two issues with that. First of all, your data is not safe on those mainframes. All these breaches prove it. If you put any data on the cloud, you risk having it copied off or lost outright. And one of the things that really annoyed me about the iOS 11 update is, even though I've turned everything off that has anything to do with the cloud, I'm not using the cloud drive or anything, it's still sending stuff to the cloud. What happens if the cloud goes down? I think I made the point yesterday that there are areas on this island where you cannot get cell phone service, or certainly not the data service. You can get voice but no data. And when you're in those areas, your music player on the iPhone won't work because all of your music is up on the cloud. And it's why I kept this old iPod, which keeps the music in its internal memory, so I'm not dependent on that connectivity. And I mentioned the story about this music software my wife was using. They changed the ports, so the licensing server was no longer being seen by our machine, and her software just turned off, even though she has a perpetual license. The problem with making us dependent on the Internet is that the Internet is not reliable. In fact, our Internet is actually substandard compared with many other countries on Earth, like Japan. And when you keep all the data centralized, that centralized data store becomes a target. And resiliency really lies in everybody having control of their own data. And that's what I want. I don't want my data on the cloud. I don't want my data anywhere where I'm not in control of it. So apparently, again, over at Apple, the Mac OS High Sierra exploit lets hackers steal keychain passwords in plain text. So apparently Apple rolled out a new version of Mac OS operating system called High Sierra 10.13, a few hours before an ex-NSA hacker publicly disclosed the details of a critical vulnerability that affects High Sierra as well as all earlier versions of Mac OS. Now, this is Patrick Wardle. He's an ex-NSA hacker and now head of research at security firm Synack, found a critical zero-day vulnerability in Mac OS that could allow any installed application to steal usernames and plain text passwords of online accounts stored in the Mac keychain. Now, if you are one of those Internet of Things people, and you have a smart home, you need to be careful there. Apparently, there are two popular home automation systems, Insteon and Wink, that are open to attacks. Now, the Insteon Hub and Wink Hub 2 are designed to connect various home products and manage automation, and the flaws represent another entry in the growing catalog of Internet of Things security shortcomings. Rapid7 discovered two unpatched issues related to authentication and radio transmission security of the Insteon Hub. Firstly, the account login and passwords for both Insteon services and the Hub hardware are stored unencrypted. In addition, the radio transmissions between the Hub and the connected devices are unencrypted. This means malicious actors with appropriate receivers can capture the radio signals at any time to manipulate any device in your home being managed via the Insteon Hub. We know that security has been a big problem with the Internet of Things, and probably the Internet of Things people thought it wasn't going to be an issue. It's not like you're storing your bank account information on there. But we've been hearing stories about how hackers are building DOS attack botnets using these Internet of Things devices. Now, here's something that's just a little bit scammy, I think. Apparently, over at CBS's Showtime, the websites contain JavaScript that secretly commandeered viewers' web browsers to mine cryptocurrency. This is Showtime.com and its instant access ShowtimeAnytime.com sibling silently pulled in code that caused browsers to use up spare processor time calculating new Monero coins. This is a privacy-focused alternative to Bitcoin. And the hidden software typically consumed as much as 60% of CPU capacity on computers visiting those sites. So shame on Showtime. Everybody's acting like your computer is their property to do whatever they want with. And it isn't. Now, apparently, in Montgomery County, Alabama, officials were forced to pay a ransom of $37,000 worth of Bitcoin when they got hit with a ransomware attack that locked up 70 terabytes of data. Nasty, nasty stuff here. Apparently, security researchers say they found a way to exploit Intel's accident-prone management engine. They're planning on revealing the problem at a Black Hat Europe convention in December. Now, Positive Technologies researchers say the exploit allows an attacker of the machine to run unsigned code in the platform controller hub on any motherboard via Skylake Plus. Now, the Intel management engine is a microcontroller that handles much of the communication between the processor and the external devices. And it was in the headlines in May of this year due to security concerns regarding the active management technology that runs on top of the engine. And it later emerged that the active management technology had a simple authentication error. An attacker could log in with an empty password field. Don't they test for these things? Now, for those whose vendors haven't pushed a firmware patch for the active management technology, Positive Technologies discovered how to switch off the management engine completely. And by the way, that's something else we've seen over the years, where operating systems and appliances will come with really cool features, and then all of a sudden it's discovered that these features are being used by the cyber criminals, and the recommendation is, well, just disable this, turn this off. You don't really need it. Well, maybe I don't need it. I want it. I paid for it. Why am I being penalized for the crimes of other people? If I'm having to turn off features in my computer, my tablet, my cell phone, then I'm getting less than I paid for. Now, apparently over in Great Britain, there's a gentleman named Mohammed Rabini. He's the director of an advocacy group. And he was stopped at Heathrow Airport coming back from basically a family business. And under Schedule 7, under the new Terrorism Act, he was ordered to give the police his phone and laptop passwords, and he refused. And he was convicted of a terror offense. Now, basically, the punishment was 620 pounds in costs and a 12-month conditional discharge, probation. But officers demanded access to his phone and laptop, and he refused. And under this current law in Great Britain, allows police and immigration officials to stop, search, question, and detain anyone at British ports and airports to determine whether they were involved in the commission, preparation, or instigation of acts of terrorism. Now, this is one of those laws that get passed to huge applause by the politicians and congratulations by the corporate media. And it's going to do absolutely nothing. Because real criminals and real terrorists know not to use the internet for communications or to keep sensitive data on their phones and laptops. And when I posted this article to whatreallyhappened.com, I included a picture of a hollowed out nickel. It's called a spy coin. They used to be advertisers with us. And it's just a nickel. And it has enough room inside to hold a micro SD card. And micro SD cards can hold huge amounts of data. SanDisk has one that will hold 400 gigabytes on a micro SD, more than a third of a terabyte. And so real criminals and terrorists are going to use devices like this to protect their secrets, while law-abiding citizens who simply desire their right to privacy are harassed, and in this case, arrested. Now, we have a right to privacy in this country. It's guaranteed by the Fourth Amendment. And the biggest threat to our data turns out to be the government itself. And I want to reprise a story I mentioned some years ago. The reason why I don't want TSA to have the right to look into my computer. When I was working on Lost, and I had occasion to travel, I had some behind-the-scenes photos from the set of Lost on my computer, on my laptop. And going through TSA, they said, we have to look at this, blah, 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 blah. And I didn't think anything about it until those photos showed up on a website. And I almost got fired over this. It seems that the TSA guy recognized the cast. He copied off the photos and he gave them to a friend who was running this fan website. And that's why I don't want TSA to look into my laptop. I'm not a terrorist. I'm annoying, obnoxious, and irritating, but I'm not a terrorist. But I have a right to keep my secrets from people who would misuse them. All right, we're going to grab a phone call from W in Texas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, how you doing, Mike? I just wanted to call about the NFL situation, and just want to make the statement that I'm pretty objective on my opinions, but I'm always for the Bill of Rights and everything. So my stance is that what they're doing is within the First Amendment. I mean, it says, protest that's not violent, basically, and that's basically what they're doing. But my other point I wanted to make to make the point here is that there's an article that says 14 ways you're disrespecting the American flag. You might not know it. And just real quick, it says flag codes, kneeling, standing is not mentioned in the flag codes, but what is mentioned is that you cannot wear the flag on your body. You cannot put flags on cups and forks and spoons like they do during the 4th of July. When they do those big flag unfurlings on the football field, those huge flags.
Yes.
Apparently, according to this, that's not allowed either.
Yes.
So I guess my point is that nobody's getting upset about those flag, things that are wrong when you deal with the flag, but they're upset about people kneeling, and that's actually not even talked about in the American flag rules.
Well,
so that's really on my point.
The ACLU would agree with you that disrespecting the flag or the anthem is a legitimate form of political protest. The issue here is that the NFL players are disrespecting our entire country en masse. If they've got some kind of a beef, like they're concerned about racism or police brutality, which, by the way, again, the statistics are showing there is no racial bias regarding white officers and black offenders. But if that's the issue, they can protest that. But what they were seen as doing on these fields was disrespecting the country as a whole, and I think that's why it rubbed Americans the wrong way. And in those other examples, the flag held horizontal, the flag on the cups on the 4th of July, while they are technically against the code governing the flag, they're meant with respect. What the football players are doing is clearly meant to be disrespectful. And again, we have to strike a fair balance between the First Amendment right to protest. But I think they went the wrong way with this, and everybody wanted to get on the fashion trend, and it's backfired horribly on them.
Well, I have to respectfully disagree, but I appreciate your comment. And I want to say this, too. The flag, yes, people have died for the flag, but the flag represents the Bill of Rights. So it still goes right back to the Bill of Rights, which is the protest. And if people died for our rights up to protect the Bill of Rights, then ultimately that what they're doing is within, the frame of, what quote unquote people have died for, although we know that's not necessarily always the case, but nonetheless, people sacrifice their lives for the Bill of Rights. The flag just represents the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. That's all I want to say. Appreciate you, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now then, getting on down to Puerto Rico, it is a mess. There's no doubt about it, and really, I wish the U.S. government would stop spending so much money on the machinery of death and start getting some machinery of life going down there. At the very least, they ought to send the USNS Comfort, which is the Navy's hospital ship, floating hospital ship. They ought to be sending that down there right now, because Puerto Rico's hospitals have been running on diesel emergency generators, and they're out of fuel. So that would be one of the first things that we would do. They're just now getting into the interior parts of Puerto Rico with the rescue teams, and it's going to be years before they repair the damage done by Hurricane Maria. There's the music. We're going to take a commercial break. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Final segment of our program today here. We're talking about Puerto Rico and all that's going on down there, and along with everything else they're dealing with, Puerto Rico, and for that matter, the entire Virgin Islands, already had a serious environmental problem, which is more than 30 overflowing landfills on the islands that were posing an environmental hazard before the hurricanes even hit. And everything that you can imagine is in these landfills: old cars, asbestos brake liners, petroleum, bottles, cans, yard waste. Who knows what's in there, even medical waste. And these landfills got flooded on out, and so now whatever's down in there is probably leaching into the groundwater, leaching into the soil at the very least. So it is an absolute epic disaster. It's going to be a long, long time before they recover from it. And just on the sake of humanity, the U.S. has to do more. The U.S. government is in possession of Puerto Rico. There comes a responsibility with that. Now, over on Bali, they're getting very, very nervous. They've already started the evacuation of 50,000 people because this Mount Agung volcano has reached a critical stage. They're getting 500 tremors recorded every single day. They don't know when it's going to erupt, but at this point they're saying, yeah, it's inevitable. It's going to happen, and it's going to be a big one. And doesn't it seem like planet Earth is just really rocking and rolling these days? 3 major quakes in Mexico, moderate quake up on the Cascadia Fault, quakes in New Zealand, Japan. It's like that whole Pacific tectonic plate is kind of squirming around right now. Now, if you are as old as I am, and if you are, you have my deepest sympathy, you'll probably remember that going back almost to the middle of the last century, Americans are warned not to eat saturated fat. The idea was that fats that are solid at room temperature, like butter or the fat found on meat, would raise cholesterol and clog coronary arteries. Modern research reveals that saturated fats are not all alike in their effects. And other components of the diet, as well as the microbes that reside in the intestines, have an important impact on the effects of eating. So you can go back and have your butter. Do y'all know where margarine came from? Margarine was a wartime substitute, where all the real butter had to be sent to the troops in Europe during winter to keep up to help them deal with the cold. And so Americans were given this synthetic material. It was actually white. Came in a bag. There was a little capsule of dye, and you'd break the capsule, and you'd knead it, and it would come out looking kind of like butter. That's the origin of margarines, wartime rations. War was over, mass advertising, they've convinced people margarine's actually good for you, and real butter from a cow is not. Oh, there's the music. All right. I was going to do another story. I'll have to hold it off till tomorrow. There's the music. Time for me to end this show and get on out and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller. He's got lots of fascinating things to share with you. Please take what you learn here and share it with everybody that you know. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network, and Aloha America.